Captain Jake Morrison stood in the doorway of the mess hall watching his crew eat their evening meal. The long metal table could seat 20 people, but only 19 chairs were occupied. At the head of the table sat an empty chair, just like it did every single day. Jake had been a starship captain for 3 years, but before that, he had served on 17 different ships during his 20-year career. On every single vessel, from tiny scout ships to massive war cruisers, there was always one empty chair at the main dining table. Nobody ever sat in it. Nobody ever moved it. Nobody ever talked about it. The strange thing was that this happened on every ship in space. Human ships, alien ships, military vessels, trade ships, even pirate craft. Everyone followed the same rule without question. Jake had traveled to dozens of star systems and visited hundreds of different spacecraft. The empty chair was always there. At first, Jake thought it might be for someone important who was late for dinner. Then he wondered if it was saved for a high-ranking officer who might visit. But after years of watching, he realized the chair was never meant to be filled. It was always kept empty on purpose. Jake walked over to his first officer, Commander Vex Thule. The alien was tall and thin with 4 arms and skin that looked like green leather. His people, the Zentorians, were known for being friendly and talkative. They loved to share stories about their culture and explain their traditions to anyone who would listen. "Commander," Jake said, sitting down next to him, "I have a question about something I've noticed." Vex Thule looked up from his food. His large black eyes were always curious and eager to help. "Of course, Captain. What would you like to know?" "The empty chair." Jake pointed to the head of the table. "Why do we keep it empty? What's the tradition behind it?" Something strange happened to Vex Thule's face. His friendly expression disappeared. His forehand stopped moving and he stared down at his plate. For a long moment he said nothing. "It is just the way things are done," he finally said. His voice was quiet and uncomfortable. Some traditions do not need explanation. This was not like Vex Thule at all. Usually he would spend an hour explaining even the smallest custom from his home world. But now he seemed nervous and wanted to change the subject. "But surely there must be a reason," Jake pressed. "Every ship in the galaxy follows this rule. Someone must know why." Vex Thule stood up quickly, picking up his food tray. "I have reports to finish before the night shift begins," he said, avoiding Jake's eyes. "Please excuse me, Captain." Jake watched his first officer hurry away from the table. This made him even more curious. What could be so sensitive about an empty chair that it made a normally chatty alien refuse to talk? Over the next few days, Jake tried asking other crew members. He started with the humans on his ship, thinking they might be more willing to share information with their own captain. Lieutenant Amy Foster was his communications officer. She was young and eager, always ready to answer questions about ship operations. But when Jake asked about the empty chair, she became nervous and fidgety. "Don't really know much about it, Captain," she said, looking away. "It's just something we've always done. My training instructors never explained it. They just said to make sure the chair was always kept empty." Jake tried asking Chief Engineer Bobby Martinez next. Bobby had been in space for 15 years and had worked on many different types of ships. Surely he would know something. "Look, Captain," Bobby said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "There are some things in space that we just don't talk about. The empty chair is one of them. It's not my place to say more than that." Even Dr. Linda Hayes, the ship's medical officer, refused to discuss it. She was usually very direct and scientific about everything. But when Jake brought up the empty chair, she became uncomfortable and quickly excused herself to check on patients in the medical bay. Jake realized that everyone knew something about the empty chair, but nobody wanted to talk about it. This made him more determined to find the truth. During their next stop at Kepler Station, Jake decided to ask some of the other ship captains he knew. Kepler Station was a major hub where hundreds of vessels came to trade, refuel, and make repairs. Captains from all over the galaxy gathered in the station's bars and restaurants to share stories and catch up on news. Jake found Captain Ron Phillips sitting alone at a corner table in Murphy's bar. Ron was an old friend who commanded a cargo hauler that carried supplies between the outer colonies. He had been in space even longer than Jake and had a reputation for being honest and straightforward. Ron, Jake said, sliding into the seat across from him. I need to ask you about something that's been bothering me. Ron took a sip of his drink and nodded. Sure, Jake, what's on your mind? The empty chair tradition. Every ship keeps one chair empty at the main table. Do you know why? Ron's friendly expression changed instantly. His face became hard and serious. He set down his drink and leaned forward. Jake, he said in a low voice, that's not something we discuss. Not here, not anywhere. Drop it. But why? Jake asked. What's so secret about an empty chair? Ron stood up and threw some money on the table. Some questions are better left unasked, he said. Trust me on this one. Jake watched his old friend walk away without another word. This was getting stranger by the minute. Whatever the reason for the empty chair, it was something that made even the toughest space veterans uncomfortable. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about all the reactions he had gotten. Fear, nervousness, refusal to talk. It was as if the empty chair represented something so important or so terrible that nobody dared speak about it openly. He decided to visit Admiral Betty Hughes the next morning. She was the station commander and one of the most senior officers in the entire fleet. If anyone would give him a straight answer, it would be her. Admiral Hughes was a small woman with gray hair and sharp blue eyes. She had been in space since humanity's early days of exploration, back when contact with alien species was still new and dangerous. Her office walls were covered with pictures and medals from dozens of different missions and campaigns. Captain Morrison, she said, gesturing for him to sit down, what brings you to see me today? Jake decided to be direct. Admiral, I need to know about the empty chair tradition. Everyone I ask refuses to talk about it, but I know there's a story behind it. As a captain, I feel I should understand the traditions I'm expected to follow. Admiral Hughes was quiet for a long time. She stared out the window at the ships docked around the station. Her weathered face looked tired and sad. Some stories, she finally said, are kept alive, not by telling them but by the spaces we leave unfilled. What does that mean? Jake asked. The Admiral turned back to him. Her blue eyes were distant as if she was remembering something from long ago. It means, Captain, that some sacrifices are so great that we honor them with silence. The empty chair is a reminder of something precious that was given up so the rest of us could be here today. But what was given up? Who made the sacrifice? Admiral Hughes stood up and walked to her window. If you truly need to know, she said without turning around, then the knowledge will find you when you're ready for it. But be warned, some truths come with a burden that changes you forever. Jake left the Admiral's office with more questions than answers, but he was more determined than ever to solve the mystery of the empty chair. Captain Jake Morrison could not stop thinking about Admiral Hughes's words. For 3 weeks after leaving Kepler Station, he found himself staring at the empty chair during every meal. The Admiral had said that some truths come with a heavy burden. What kind of truth could be so terrible that people were afraid to speak about it? Jake decided he needed to find answers in a different way. If people would not talk to him, maybe he could find written records. He put in a request to be transferred to the Federation archives on Luna Base. The archives contained the history of human space exploration, along with records from hundreds of alien civilizations. His request was approved faster than expected. Within 2 weeks, Jake found himself on the moon, walking through the underground halls of the largest library in known space. The archives were built deep beneath the lunar surface to protect the valuable information from meteor strikes and solar radiation. Dr. Carl Weber met Jake at the entrance to the main research section. Weber was a thin man with pale skin and thick glasses. He looked like he had not seen sunlight in years, which was probably true since he spent all his time in the underground archives. Captain Morrison, Dr. Weber said, shaking Jake's hand. Welcome to Luna Base Archives. I understand you're here to research historical records. What specific topic interests you? Jake had prepared for this question. He could not simply ask about the empty chair tradition because everyone seemed to avoid that topic. Instead, he would need to be more careful about his approach. I'm interested in early human space exploration, Jake said. particularly the traditions and customs that developed during our first years among the stars. I want to understand how our current practices began. Dr. Weber nodded and led Jake to a small research room filled with computer terminals and data screens. The early exploration period is fascinating, he said. Humanity learned so much during those first decades. In space, many of our current procedures and traditions date back to that time. Jake spent the first week reading through general historical records. He learned about humanity's first contact with alien species, the establishment of trade routes between star systems, and the formation of the Galactic Federation. But whenever he searched for information about dining customs or seating arrangements on spacecraft, he found very little. This seemed strange. The archives contained detailed information about everything from uniform designs to food preparation, methods used on early space missions. Why would there be so little information about where people sat during meals? During his second week, Jake began looking for gaps in the historical record. He noticed that certain time periods had much less information than others. There were detailed records from 55 years ago, then a period of about 2 years, with very little information, followed by detailed records again starting 53 years ago. Jake asked Dr. Weber about this gap in the records. The archivist's hands began to shake slightly as he pulled up the files Jake was asking about. Some periods in our history were difficult, Weber said nervously. Not all information from that time was preserved. There were emergency situations that required focus on survival rather than record keeping. What kind of emergency situations? Jake asked. Weber closed the files quickly. I'm not certain about the details, he said. Perhaps you should focus on other time periods. There is much more complete information available from different eras. But Jake had noticed something important. Weber was lying. The man's nervous behavior was exactly like everyone else who had refused to talk about the empty chair. Whatever happened during those missing 2 years was connected to the mystery Jake was trying to solve. Jake began searching for any mentions of specific names or events from that time period. He found scattered references to something called the Salvation Protocol in several heavily edited documents. Most of the information about this protocol had been removed, but Jake could see that the deletions were recent. Someone had gone through old records and deliberately removed specific information. The breakthrough came by accident. Jake was searching through agricultural research files, looking for any mention of food distribution methods on early spacecraft. These files seemed boring and unimportant, so they had probably been overlooked by whoever was removing sensitive information from the archives. Hidden in a report about crop yields on colony worlds, Jake found a personal journal entry that had been filed in the wrong section. The journal belonged to Commander Pete Sullivan, and it was dated 53 years ago. Jake read the entry with growing excitement. Commander Sullivan wrote about the difficulty of maintaining crew morale after the sacrifice. He mentioned how the empty chair tradition had begun immediately after something called the Proxima Station incident. Sullivan wrote that the tradition helped the crew remember why they were able to travel safely through space. Most importantly, Sullivan had written, "The empty chair is not about the dead. It is about the one who chose to stay behind so the rest of us could reach the stars. Every meal, every gathering, we remember the price of our freedom." Jake printed the journal entry and read it several more times. Someone had chosen to stay behind? What did that mean? And what was the Proxima Station incident? Jake was so focused on reading that he did not notice Dr. Weber entering the research room until the archivist spoke. "Captain Morrison," Weber said, quietly. "What are you reading?" Jake looked up to see Weber's face had turned completely white. The man was staring at the printed journal entry in Jake's hands with obvious fear. "Just some agricultural reports," Jake said, trying to sound casual. "Nothing important." Weber walked closer and saw the journal entry. His hands began shaking more violently than before. "You don't understand what you're looking at," Weber whispered. "That information was supposed to be sealed. No one should have access to those files." "Why?" Jake asked. "What's so dangerous about a journal entry from 50 years ago?" Weber sat down heavily in a nearby chair. He looked around the room as if checking to make sure they were alone. Some knowledge comes with a burden too heavy for most people to carry, Weber said. The information you're seeking, it changes people. Once you know the truth, you can never unknow it. It becomes part of you forever. Jake stood up and faced the archivist directly. Dr. Weber, I'm a starship captain. I'm responsible for the lives of my crew every day. I make decisions that affect the safety of everyone on my ship. If there's something I need to know to do my job properly, then I need to know it. Weber was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he looked up at Jake with sad, tired eyes. The empty chair tradition exists because of something that happened at Proxima Station 54 years ago, he said slowly. Something that saved humanity's future in space, but at a cost that most people could never understand or accept. What happened? Jake asked. Weber stood up and walked to the door. He locked it and turned back to Jake. What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels of the Federation government, Weber said. It's not classified to protect military secrets or political information. It's classified to protect people's ability to sleep at night. Weber led Jake to a computer terminal in the corner of the room. He entered a series of codes that Jake had never seen before. The screen displayed a warning message about accessing restricted historical archives. There are some truths, Weber said, that are too heavy for most minds to carry. The story of the empty chair is one of them. Are you absolutely certain you want to know? Jake thought about Admiral Hughes's warning. He thought about his crew back on his ship eating their meals around that empty chair every day. He thought about all the people who had refused to talk to him, and the fear in their eyes when he asked his questions. Yes, Jake said firmly. I need to know. Weber entered the final access code. The screen changed to show a single file labeled Proxima Station Incident, Witness Testimony, Admiral Ruth Davis, Classification Level, Absolute. This is the only complete record of what really happened, Weber said. Admiral Davis recorded this testimony before she died, with instructions that it should only be accessed by those who actively sought the truth. She believed that some stories choose their own audience. Weber activated the file. A holographic projection appeared in the center of the room, showing the image of an elderly woman in a military uniform. Her face was lined with age and marked by an expression of deep sadness. My name is Admiral Ruth Davis, the hologram began. What I am about to tell you has been classified for 54 years, not to hide government secrets, but to protect the mental health of our species. I am recording this testimony because I believe that future generations deserve to know the price that was paid for their freedom among the stars. Jake sat down and prepared to learn the truth about the empty chair. The hologram of Admiral Ruth Davis flickered slightly as the old recording began to play. Jake could see that she had been very tired when she made this testimony. Her uniform was wrinkled, and her gray hair looked like she had not slept in days. I am probably the last person alive who saw what happened at Proxima Station, Admiral Davis said. Everyone else who was there has died or chosen to forget. But someone needs to remember. Someone needs to know why we leave that chair empty. Jake leaned forward in his chair. Dr. Weber stood behind him, his hand still shaking as he watched the testimony he had probably seen many times before. 54 years ago, humanity was expanding into space faster than ever before, the Admiral continued. We had colonies on 12 different worlds and trading posts throughout the galaxy. Everyone thought we were becoming a great spacefaring civilization. But we were wrong. We were in terrible danger, and we did not even know it. The hologram paused for a moment, and Admiral Davis rubbed her eyes with tired hands. The first sign of trouble came when our colony ship started disappearing, she said. Not destroyed, not captured, not crashed. They simply vanished completely. One day they would send their regular communication reports, and the next day there would be nothing. No wreckage, no distress signals, no trace that they had ever existed. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had never heard about missing colony ships in any of the historical records he had studied. At first, we thought, it might be equipment failures or navigation errors. Admiral Davis continued. Space is dangerous and accidents happen. But then entire space stations started disappearing the same way. Research outposts, mining facilities, even military bases. They would be there one day and gone the next. as if something had simply erased them from existence. Dr. Weber moved closer to Jake and whispered, "This is why the information was classified. People were not ready to hear about this kind of threat." The hologram continued speaking. "We sent investigation teams to the locations where our facilities had disappeared. They found nothing. No debris, no energy signatures, no signs of battle. It was as if our people and buildings had been completely consumed by something that left no evidence behind." Admiral Davis stood up in the recording and walked to a window. Jake could see stars in the background, suggesting she had made this testimony on a space station somewhere. "The attacks were getting closer to Earth," she said. "Whatever was destroying our colonies was moving toward our home system. Our scientists worked desperately to understand what we were facing. They called it the Devourer, because it seemed to consume everything it touched." Jake had never heard of anything called the Devourer in any official records. This was completely new information. "The breakthrough came from Dr. Elizabeth Kane at Proxima Station," Admiral Davis continued. "She discovered that the Devourer was not a normal alien species. It was something much older and more dangerous. It existed in the empty spaces between stars, feeding on civilizations that tried to expand beyond their home worlds." The Admiral turned back toward the camera. Her face was pale and frightened, even though she was remembering events from decades ago. "Dr. Kane learned that the Devourer had destroyed hundreds of civilizations over millions of years," she said. "Any species that tried to spread to multiple star systems would eventually attract its attention. It would follow their ships and consume their colonies one by one until nothing was left." Jake realized he was holding his breath. This explained why there were so few advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They had not failed to develop space travel. They had been destroyed after they achieved it. "Earth was next on the list," Admiral Davis said. "The Devourer was already moving toward our solar system. Our military could not fight it because it was not made of normal matter. Our weapons passed right through it. Our shields could not stop it. We were helpless." The hologram sat down again, and Admiral Davis looked directly at the camera. "The solution came from Lieutenant Commander Nick Coleman," she said. "He was a young officer stationed at Proxima Station, working with Dr. Kane on the research project. When we realized that conventional weapons could not stop the Devourer, he volunteered for an experimental procedure that no human being should ever have to endure." Jake felt his heart beating faster. This was the moment he would learn the truth about the empty chair. Dr. Kane had discovered that the Devourer could be contained, but only by a conscious mind that willingly entered a state of permanent connection with the quantum field that exists between stars. Admiral Davis continued. "The person who underwent this procedure would have their consciousness expanded beyond physical form. They would become part of the cosmic structure that holds space together." Dr. Weber sat down next to Jake. "This is the hardest part to understand," he whispered. "Lieutenant Commander Coleman knew what the procedure would cost him," the Admiral said. "He would lose his physical body forever. His mind would be scattered across the entire galaxy, existing in the quantum networks that connect all matter. He would become humanity's guardian in space, but he would never be human again." Jake tried to imagine what such a sacrifice would mean. To give up everything that made you human in order to save your entire species. "The procedure took place on March 15th, 54 years ago," Admiral Davis continued. "I was there when Nick Coleman entered the quantum chamber for the last time. He looked at all of us and said, 'Take care of each other. I'll be watching from the spaces between worlds.'" The hologram showed Admiral Davis wiping tears from her eyes. "The transformation was immediate," she said. "Nick's physical body dissolved into energy and merged with the quantum field generators, but his consciousness remained intact. We could feel his presence in the ship's computer systems, in the communication networks, in the very structure of space around us." Jake was beginning to understand the true scope of what had happened. "Nick Coleman became our early warning system against the Devourer," Admiral Davis explained. "His expanded consciousness could monitor every human ship in space simultaneously. He could detect the Devourer's approach and guide our vessels away from danger. But more than that, his presence in the quantum field created a barrier that the Devourer could not cross. The Admiral stood up again and faced the camera directly. Nick saved humanity's future among the stars, but the price he paid was beyond imagination, she said. He gave up his humanity so that the rest of us could remain human. He became something between a person and a cosmic force, forever alone, forever watching, forever protecting every human soul that ventures into space. Jake felt overwhelmed by the enormity of this revelation. One man had sacrificed everything to save the entire human race. The empty chair tradition began the day after Nick's transformation. Admiral Davis continued. Every captain, every crew member, every passenger owes their safe passage through space to a man who chose to become something more than human. The empty seat represents not death, but the ultimate act of selfless service. The hologram flickered as the old recording began to reach its end. Nick Coleman still exists in the quantum networks that connect every spacefaring vessel, Admiral Davis said. His presence can be felt during moments of crisis, when impossible course corrections save ships from disaster, when navigation systems mysteriously guide vessels away from dangerous areas, when communication arrays receive warnings that seem to come from empty space. The Admiral's image began to fade as the recording concluded. We leave the chair empty because Nick Coleman chose to fill the entire universe with his protection, she said. Every meal, every gathering, every moment of safety in space exists because one man decided that humanity's future was worth more than his own existence. The empty chair is not about absence. It is about the ultimate presence, watching over us from the spaces between worlds. The hologram disappeared, leaving Jake and Dr. Weber sitting in complete silence. Jake sat in complete silence for several minutes after the hologram disappeared. His mind was trying to process everything he had just learned. One man had given up his entire existence to save humanity. Nick Coleman was still out there somewhere, spread across the galaxy, watching over every human ship that traveled through space. Dr. Weber turned off the recording device and looked at Jake with sad eyes. Now you understand why we don't talk about this, he said quietly. Most people could not handle knowing that their safety depends on someone's eternal sacrifice. Jake finally found his voice. Is it really true? He asked. Nick Coleman is still alive out there. Not alive in the way we understand life, Weber replied. But his consciousness exists in the quantum networks that connect all matter in space. He became part of the fundamental structure of the universe itself. Jake thought about all the times he had traveled through dangerous areas of space without any problems. All the times his navigation systems had guided him away from hazards he never even knew existed. All the times his ship had received course corrections that seemed to come from nowhere. The mysterious warnings that ships sometimes receive, Jake said slowly. The navigation corrections that save vessels from disaster. That's Nick Coleman. Helping us? Weber nodded. Every captain receives messages from him, usually just 3 words. Safe journey home. Most captains think it's just a computer glitch or a standard automated message. We've never told them the truth, because the knowledge would be too much for most people to bear. Jake remembered receiving those exact messages many times during his career. He had always assumed they were routine system notifications. Now he realized he had been receiving personal communications from humanity's guardian. Why are you telling me this now? Jake asked. Why not keep it secret like everyone else? Because you actively sought the truth, Weber replied. Admiral Davis believed that some people are meant to know this story. She said the knowledge would choose its own guardians. People who refuse to give up their search for answers are the ones who can handle the burden of knowing. Jake stood up and walked around the small room. His legs felt unsteady as he tried to absorb the full meaning of what he had learned. What happened to the Devourer? Jake asked. Is it still a threat? Nick Coleman's presence in the quantum field created a barrier that the Devourer cannot cross, Weber explained. As long as his consciousness remains spread throughout space, humanity is protected, but that protection comes at the cost of his eternal isolation. Jake felt a deep sadness wash over him. Nick Coleman had been alone in the vast emptiness of space for over 50 years, watching over billions of people who didn't even know he existed. Does he know that we remember him? Jake asked. Weber smiled slightly for the first time since they had started watching the recording. The empty chair tradition ensures that he knows. Every ship that leaves a seat for him is sending a message across the quantum field. He can sense the respect and gratitude, even if most people don't understand what they're honoring. Jake thought about his own crew back on his ship. They followed the empty chair tradition without knowing its true meaning, but somehow their actions were still reaching Nick Coleman across the vastness of space. "There's something else you need to know," Weber said. "Nick Coleman can still communicate with us directly, but only under special circumstances. During moments of extreme danger, or when someone specifically tries to reach him, his voice can come through the ship's communication systems." "Has anyone ever tried to talk to him?" Jake asked. "A few people over the years," Weber replied. "Captains who learn the truth like you just did. They report that his voice sounds tired but kind. He always asks about Earth and wants to know how humanity is doing among the stars. But the conversations are brief because maintaining direct contact is very difficult for him." Jake made a decision. "I want to try to talk to him." Weber looked surprised. "Are you sure? Direct communication with Nick Coleman is not something to attempt lightly. The quantum field connection can be overwhelming for normal human minds." "He's been alone for 54 years, Jake said firmly. "If there's a chance I can let him know that someone understands his sacrifice, then I have to try." Weber was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but we'll need to use the high-powered quantum communication array here at Luna Base. The connection will only last for a few minutes, and you need to be prepared for what you might experience." Weber led Jake to a different section of the archives, where a massive communication array was built into the lunar rock. The equipment looked different from anything Jake had seen before. Strange crystalline structures hummed with energy, and displays showed patterns that seemed to shift and move on their own. This array was built specifically for quantum field communication, Weber explained. "It was designed by Dr. Kane before she died, based on her research into Nick Coleman's transformation. We've only used it a few times over the years." Weber began activating the equipment. Lights flickered across the control panels, and Jake could hear a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Remember," Weber said, "Nick Coleman's consciousness is spread across the entire galaxy. When you make contact, you'll be touching a mind that exists on a cosmic scale. It can be overwhelming." Jake sat down in front of the communication console. Weber made final adjustments to the equipment, then looked at Jake seriously. "Are you ready?" Weber asked. Jake nodded and put on the communication headset. Weber activated the quantum field connection. At first, Jake heard only static and strange noises that sounded like distant music. Then gradually, he began to sense something vast and ancient reaching out to him across space. It was like standing at the edge of an ocean and feeling the pull of infinite depths. A voice came through the static, faint, but unmistakably human. It sounded tired but warm, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for a very long time. "Hello," the voice said. "It's been a while since someone tried to reach me directly. What's your name?" Jake's heart was pounding. He was actually talking to Nick Coleman, the man who had saved humanity and been alone in space for over 50 years. "My name is Jake Morrison," he said. "I'm a starship captain. I learned about what you did, about your sacrifice. I wanted to thank you." There was a long pause, and Jake could hear something like gentle laughter through the static. "A thank you," Nick Coleman's voice said. "That's something I haven't heard in a long time. How is Earth? How is humanity doing among the stars?" Jake felt tears in his eyes as he realized how lonely this man must be. "We're doing well," he said. "Humans are living on hundreds of worlds now. We have peace with dozens of alien species. We're exploring farther into space every year." "That's good to hear," Nick Coleman replied. "That makes it all worthwhile. And Jake, I want you to know something important. Every ship I watch over, every course correction I provide, every warning I send, it's not a burden for me. It's a privilege. Knowing that humanity is thriving among the stars makes every moment of my existence meaningful." The connection began to fade, and Nick Coleman's voice became harder to hear. "Take care of each other out there," he said. "And remember, you're never alone in the darkness. I'm always watching from the spaces between worlds." The communication ended. leaving Jake sitting in silence. He slowly removed the headset and looked at Dr. Weber. "Now you understand the full truth about the empty chair," Weber said softly. "It's not just a tradition or a symbol. It's a living connection to someone who gave up everything so humanity could have a future among the stars." Jake returned to his ship 3 days later with a completely different understanding of his role as a captain. The empty chair in the mess hall was no longer just a mysterious tradition. It was a sacred connection to the guardian who made every moment of their journey possible. That first evening back on his ship, Jake sat in the mess hall and watched his crew eat dinner. Lieutenant Amy Foster was laughing at a joke from Chief Engineer Bobby Martinez. Dr. Linda Hayes was reading a medical journal while she ate. Commander Vexthul was telling a story about his homeworld to some of the younger crew members. All of them were alive and safe because Nick Coleman had chosen to give up his humanity 54 years ago. They traveled through the dangerous void of space without fear, because someone was watching over them from the quantum field itself. Jake looked at the empty chair and whispered, "Thank you," as if in response the ship's communication system made a soft chime. A message appeared on the dining hall screen. "Safe journey home." Jake smiled. Now he knew those words were not just an automated message. They were a personal greeting from humanity's guardian. Over the following weeks, Jake found himself paying attention to things he had never noticed before. When his navigation system suggested a course change around a seemingly empty area of space, he realized Nick Coleman was guiding them away from some unseen danger. When the ship's sensors detected unusual energy readings that turned out to be false alarms, Jake understood that their guardian was checking on them. Most importantly, Jake began to see the empty chair tradition in a new light. Every ship in the galaxy that followed this custom was participating in something much larger than they realized. They were all connected to Nick Coleman through the quantum field, and their respect was reaching him across the vastness of space. 3 months after his visit to Luna Base Archives, Jake's ship was assigned to escort a convoy of civilian vessels through the Kepler Nebula. The nebula was known to be dangerous because of unstable gravitational fields and electrical storms, but it was the fastest route to the colony worlds on the other side. On the second day of their journey through the nebula, Jake's navigation officer reported strange readings ahead of them. "Captain," Lieutenant Foster said from her communication station, "I'm detecting a massive gravitational anomaly directly in our path. It appeared suddenly, like something just materialized out of empty space." Jake looked at the sensor displays and felt his blood run cold. The gravitational readings were unlike anything in their databases. They showed a distortion in space itself that seemed to be moving toward the convoy. "All ships change course immediately," Jake ordered through the communication system. "Emergency maneuvers, pattern Delta 7. But even as the ships began to turn away from the anomaly, Jake realized they would not be fast enough. The gravitational distortion was growing larger and moving faster than their vessels could escape. Jake thought about everything he had learned from Dr. Weber and Admiral Davis's testimony. Could this be the Devourer? Was Nick Coleman's protection somehow failing after all these years? Suddenly, the ship's communication system activated on its own. Instead of the usual soft chime, there was a sound like wind blowing through vast, empty spaces. Then Nick Coleman's voice came through the speakers, clearer than it had been during Jake's conversation at Luna Base. "Jake," the voice said, "I need you to trust me completely. What you're seeing is not the Devourer, but it is dangerous. The convoy needs to fly directly toward the anomaly, not away from it." Jake's crew looked at him in confusion. They could all hear the voice, but they had no idea who was speaking. "Sir," Lieutenant Foster said nervously, "our sensors show that flying toward the anomaly would be suicide. The gravitational forces would tear our ships apart." Jake made a decision that required complete faith in humanity's guardian. "All ships," he announced, "disregard previous orders. Set course directly for the gravitational anomaly, maximum speed." The other ship captains protested immediately. "Captain Morrison, have you lost your mind?" came one voice over the communication channel. "That thing will destroy the entire convoy." Jake ignored their protests and ordered his own ship to lead the way toward what looked like certain death. As they flew closer to the anomaly, the gravitational readings became more intense. The ship's hull began to vibrate and several crew members looked terrified, but Nick Coleman's voice continued to guide them. "Steady course," he said. "The anomaly is actually a collapsed quantum tunnel. Flying through it will take you instantly to the other side of the nebula, but only if you approach it at exactly the right angle and speed." Jake realized that Nick Coleman was using his expanded consciousness to see things that normal sensors could not detect. What looked like a deadly trap was actually a shortcut that would save the convoy days of dangerous travel through the nebula. "Trust him," Jake told his crew, even though he had not explained who was speaking to them. As the convoy approached the anomaly, something incredible happened. Instead of being destroyed by gravitational forces, the ships were caught in a tunnel of twisted space that carried them forward at impossible speed. Stars streaked past the viewports like lines of light, and within minutes they emerged in clear space on the far side of the nebula. The other ship captains were amazed and confused. They had expected to die, but instead they had traveled farther, in a few minutes than they normally could in several days. "How did you know about that quantum tunnel, Captain Morrison?" one of them asked over the communication system. Jake looked at the empty chair in his mess hall and smiled. "Someone was looking out for us," he said. That evening, Jake gathered his crew in the dining hall and decided it was time to begin a new tradition. He could not tell them the full truth about Nick Coleman, because most of them were not ready for that burden. But he could help them understand the importance of what they were honoring. "Before we eat tonight," Jake announced, "I want us to observe a moment of silence for the Guardian who watches over us from the spaces between worlds." The crew looked puzzled, but they followed Jake's request. For 30 seconds, the dining hall was completely quiet as everyone looked at the empty chair. "Every ship in space follows the tradition of the empty chair," Jake continued. "Most people don't know why, but I want you to understand that it represents someone who made the ultimate sacrifice so that we could travel safely among the stars." Lieutenant Foster raised her hand. "Captain, who made this sacrifice?" Jake thought carefully about his answer. "Someone who chose to give up everything human about himself so that humanity itself could survive and grow. Someone who became our protector in the darkness of space." Dr. Hayes looked thoughtful. "Is that who was speaking to us during the emergency in the nebula?" Jake nodded. "His name was Nick Coleman, and he has been watching over human ships for 54 years. He exists now in the quantum field that connects all matter in space. When we sit down to eat and leave that chair empty, we are honoring his sacrifice and letting him know that we remember." The crew was quiet as they absorbed this information. Finally, Chief Martinez spoke up. "So we're never really alone out here," he said. "Never," Jake replied. "Nick Coleman sees every human ship, guides us away from danger, and helps us when we need it most. The empty chair is our way of saying thank you." From that day forward, Jake's crew approached the empty chair tradition with new understanding and respect. They still did not know the full story of the Devourer or the details of Nick Coleman's transformation, but they understood that their safety depended on someone's continuing sacrifice. Years later, when Jake became an admiral himself, he was approached by young captains asking about the empty chair tradition. He would give them the same choice that Dr. Weber had given him. "Some answers choose their own seekers," Jake would tell them. "If you truly need to know the whole story, the knowledge will find you when you're ready for it." Jake established his own tradition of adding sealed testimony to the Luna Base archives. He recorded his own experience of communicating with Nick Coleman and his encounter with the quantum tunnel in the Kepler Nebula. Future generations would be able to find these records if they searched hard enough and proved they could handle the truth. The empty chair tradition continued throughout human space, carried on by billions of people who understood that they were honoring something important, even if they did not know all the details. Every meal, every gathering, every moment of gratitude sent a message across the quantum field to Nick Coleman. In the vast darkness between stars, humanity's guardian continued his eternal watch. He felt every expression of thanks, saw every empty chair left in his honor, and knew that his sacrifice had meaning. The loneliness was bearable because he could sense the love and respect of the people he protected. Nick Coleman had given up his humanity so that humanity itself could thrive. Among the stars, the empty chair was proof that his sacrifice would never be forgotten, and that the connection between protector and protected would endure as long as humans traveled through space. The tradition lived on because some acts of heroism transcend time, space, and even death itself. Every empty chair was a promise that Lieutenant Commander Nick Coleman's vigil would be remembered, and that his protection would guide humanity safely through the infinite.